let's see. Where we go? Let's move the slides on. Right, I think today we have with us Kevin, who's fresh back from a session with the Chancellor and others. We have Naomi. Hi, Naomi. Happy New Year to you.
Well, it was Happy New Year until about 3 minutes past 12. Hey, Kevin.
I'm just waiting to announce the world what confusion I've got.
Okay, all right, we shall do that in a minute. Right, okay, we have Gareth with us. Hi, Gareth.
Hello, glwyddyn newydd i chi gyd.
And to you too. You know, you could be swearing at us all.
Actually, Gareth, that was probably more understanding than the webinar we just understood or listened to. So yeah, probably a good one.
Okay. Now I believe that Laura is on holiday today, and Liz is gone off somewhere on business. And of course, we have Kevin with us, which I think I said just a minute ago. We also have with us Nick Turner, who's going to be marshalling. Hi, Nick.
Hello. Afternoon, everyone.
And it's a bit sad to say, but this is going to be Nick's last session at marshalling for us. Nick is in fact heading off to pastures new.
Oh no!
At the end of the month, yes. So yeah. So this is the last time that we'll have Nick on here. But we wish him all the best for the future, and I'm sure he may even come on as a delegate in the future. All right.
Never know.
There's the you've just missed out on the Golden Globes there, Nick. Right. Okay. So I've only got a couple of subjects today. One I suspect is probably going to take a bit longer than necessarily the other, or we may not even get to the other. But I'm really going to be handing over to Kevin and Naomi to tell us about council tax and business rates update. So Kevin, over to you. You've just come fresh from a meeting with the Chancellor, who's
I don't think the Chancellor was on the call, Malcolm, but it was the BIS webinar on grants. And can I thank everyone for switching from 12 o'clock our normal time to 1 o'clock? I do appreciate that. I'm sure that a few of you were on the call at 12 o'clock on grants. For those of you that had a little bit of a festive break, you'll notice that on the 21st of December, the Chancellor announced around about lunchtime that there'd be some more grant schemes. The OHL grant, the Omicron Hospitality and Leisure grant, and also the updated ARG. He did say, because the Treasury did actually issue a document that day outlining some of the details of the grants, although some of the details have changed subsequently as well. The guidance, it was initially promised before Christmas. I did lose a wager because I expected it at 3:30 on Christmas Eve, so I did lose that particular wager. It actually came in at 3:21 on the 30th of December. The guidance has yet, please note, we haven't yet received any funding from it, and as those on the webinar did actually hear today, there is a award letter. Award letter went out on Friday, apparently, to Section 151 officers, although they've corrected that and sending a new one, and payments should be in your bank accounts on Tuesday or tomorrow. So what does it entail? Well, there is the Omicron Hospitality and Leisure grant. For those of you that haven't processed grants, they've basically ripped all the schemes up that they've done before and given us a completely new scheme to administer. And there needs to be an application form, there needs to be a prepayment check, and there needs to be a post-payment check. Some of the categories are confusing, and in the guidance they do mention discretion. Although discretion is always dangerous when they are the paymasters, and anyone that has endured their post-payment assurance processes and their reconciliation processes will know how rigorous they are when it comes. So I would treat any discretion with a great deal of nervousness, and I'm usually pretty gung-ho, as most of you will know. we have found that certain sectors have been removed from the Restart 2 grants, and it's the closest to the Restart 2 grants, which was from April for the leisure, hospitality, accommodation and care sector. We found that they'd taken out completely the care. Now, obviously, I don't have to worry about hairdressers and beauty salons quite so much, but I do consider that they're probably affected by Omicron, and they are places where people mix, which I was rather surprised by their comments in the earlier webinar. So that's a question I would ask. We found that sporting clubs have been taken off, and it was confusing because at first they said that gyms weren't entitled to it, and then they suggested that gyms may be entitled to it, and we got to wait for further guidance. When that further guidance will come, I don't know. And additional questions. Please note that all applications have to be in by the 28th of February, and you must have paid all your payments by the 31st of March. Obviously, they're clarifying for us when the post-assurance has got to be done. And we're still awaiting, I would suggest, the clarification of which groups to pay, and we're already at the 10th of January. And I would suggest that we'll probably be waiting most of this week at least for the updated guidance. On the Omicron hospitality and leisure grants, it's up to 15,000 is a 2,667 grant. Up to 15 to 51,000 rateable value is a 4,000 grant, and it's a £6,000 grant for anything over 51k if you meet one of the qualifying criteria. And to be honest, we're all confused over the qualifying criteria, probably even more so after the last meeting. In respect of ARG, the original indication was that they would actually pay you. They would give more to the authorities that had paid all the ARG out previously. In practice, they've actually paid per business ARG. So those authorities that have used all their ARG, and we're one of them, have only got £314,000 to spend on the new ARG. That is going to cause us an awful lot of issues, because at the end of the day, you can have a lot of businesses that are affected by Omicron. You only have to look at the affection rates to see what the impact is for that. We're already live at my authority with Omicron hospitality and leisure grants. We actually went live on the 30th of December, to be fair, and we've already made our first payments. But there is still a lot of confusion over which categories, and to be honest, I'm even more confused after the BRS webinar. So if anyone else can shed any light on it, and I'll ask Naomi in a minute, please do let me know. And the ARG is also to a similar timetable. ARG for us is a discretionary grant. I'd have to go and seek member approval to pay it, because the scheme has changed slightly. So that's going to take slightly longer, and I'm probably going to pay on the 17th of, start opening up on the 17th of January. We've got a West Sussex set of guidelines. More than happy to share that. I'm not saying you use them, but it's happy to give you a lead in to that. That's all I've got to say on grants at this time. Just on these new grants, I'll open up to Naomi in a minute. On the back side of it, please note you can ask for an extension for any reconciliation work and also any post-assurance work, because business rates, and I'll come on to CARF shortly, business rates is quite hugely impacted by the NNDR1, by preparing for annual billing, by grants and by CARF. And don't start me off on subsidy allowance, because the anoraks amongst you, and I'll probably count myself as one of them, will see that subsidy allowances is different for grants than it is for CARF. And then we've got cash caps for ERD. And I'll come on to ERD later. Naomi, do you want to add anything to all that?
I'm really putting my filter on here. Yeah, Kevin, we also spent our ARG and we got a miserly 215,000 in the next load of top-ups. So that's not a great deal of money. You mentioned the deadline of the 28th of February. That's even worse than that, because the chat today, we've got to have decided them by the 28th of February. That's
not according to the guidance, but I'd agree with you. The confusion today was massive, because they did suggest you had to decide it and then pay by the 31st of March.
About 3 or 4 times. So not only do we not know definitively what the criteria for the OHLG is. Now, if you don't know what the OHLG criteria is, you can't really set your ARG criteria, because your ARG will support those that are excluded from the OHLG. So we're going to have to wait until we find that out. We then got to create the application process, receive the applications, ask for all of the evidence if needed. Then we've got to decide on them, and we've got to do the pre-payment checks all by the 28th of February. They've got to be having a laugh, surely.
Or before.
Well, yeah, that's your deadline. So if you've had a stash in that final week, I don't know what's going to happen. And I just thought...
please note, just pick up on one point there, Naomi. You can pay ARG on top of OHL, although that has been confusing. But I'd agree with you. You need to know who you're paying for the OHL to decide who you're going to pay ARG to. That's
got to be your first step, because you don't be paying someone out of ARG when you would have paid them out of the OHLG.
Yes.
Unbelievable. The two representatives from Bays, Teflon coated, just did not understand, didn't take on board the issues and problems. We're also, as a team, doing the self-isolation payments.
Yeah.
Changes to that. I've got a webinar this afternoon on that. We've got annual billing. We still have people who are, funny enough, catching not just a cold, but, you know, COVID. We are struggling. They just did not take...
And probably not recognised even with their own authorities, Naomi.
No. I'm just very disillusioned by it today.
Yeah.
That all sounds fairly gloomy.
Can I just carry on, Malcolm, please?
Yeah, go on.
Because I haven't finished yet on business rates. Just to add to the further now.
Well, I was going to say, just before you add to the further, can we just see whether anybody's got any questions from the floor?
Yeah,
We've
happy
heard
to do so.
Mostly what do all the acronyms stand for?
Can I come chip in with something which probably messes even further, which is, is there a process, or should there be a process for challenging refusals for these grants?
There is. First of all, it would be through the authorities' complaints process, and then it's through the Ombudsman. In fact, there was a couple of notes about requiring details of the transcript of the meeting today, because we think authorities will need to rely on what the Bays team have now said, which is not part of the original documentation.
For example, they did actually say the authorities could use their discretion. Now, interpretation on discretion goes a long way. And could they come back and then refuse that in the post assurance process, because that is quite stringent, the post assurance place, probably the biggest I've ever seen, and I used to be in the audit commission. Now there's that, and also the Ombudsman is challenging authorities on the administration of grants. Well, I don't think BIS have helped local authorities today.
No,
I mean certainly it's very easy to create a process which does actually fetter your discretion, the last thing you clearly want to do. And I know from experience in the past that having to go via the monitoring officer is also kind of a thing which doesn't cheer people up internally within local authorities.
Yep, and I see John has asked a question. Hello, John. It's good to hear from you. An application is mandatory for both Omicron Hospitality and Leisure, that's OHL, and ARG, the Additional Restrictions Grant. You do not have any excuse for not doing an application form. It's mandatory within the guidance.
Is it a mandatory form, or is it a form that you just have to have?
We have to have a form. It's not a mandatory form. There is no system provided by BIS. Authorities should generate their own forms and own systems, etc. There is new burdens funding paid for it, which we tend to get about 4-6 months later in terms of it. But there is no specific form provided.
So the form isn't prescribed, but
no.
This form is mandatory.
Certain information that you need off businesses is prescribed, but not the form itself.
Okay.
Naomi, you'd agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. And the other little thing they chucked in is that when we make the payments, they're prescribing what goes on the payment reference.
Yeah. Malcolm, I'd suggest you get your retirement plan in.
We do a lot of forms design and online form production for people, and there's already a kind of a waiting list for various strange things.
Would you like me to go on to the? I think that's quite interesting. You say that, and quite pertinent.
Okay. Do you want to carry on then with the?
Yeah, I'll carry on just to add to the woe and the additional thing on business rate staff, because business rates happen to be a little bit in the corner until about 4 or 5, 6 years ago, and suddenly it's increased beyond all recognition. Can I mention COVID, the CARF scheme, COVID Additional Relief Fund Scheme? That's come out. It came out, I think, on the 15th of December. It is a additional scheme on top of to give relief because the Valuation Office agency couldn't cope with MCC change of circumstances appeals for COVID. So they've dumped it on local government. Oh, great. Local government can deal with it. So as well as your ARG, as well as your OHL, we have got the CARF scheme to administer. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, and John, you've got a technical system background. I would suggest a lot of what they want within the CARF scheme is going to be a manual process, because you have to try and figure out if businesses have been affected by COVID and impacts on income, etc. So that's even more work on authorities over and above what we've got before. And as I mentioned earlier on, the subsidy allowances are not the same as for the grants. So you've got that to do in addition to your grants. You've got until the 30th of September to do it, because it's a discretionary grant. You can backdate it. I would suggest, because of the subsidy allowances and because of potential fraud and because of other help, etc., it's something you probably couldn't automate, because you've got to look at each individual case in its own merits. The guidance doesn't include an application form, but I'd suggest to protect your back, bearing in mind that BIS, when they first mentioned, grants, they said pay it and there'd be no controls. They changed that. You've got to remember, CARF has come from the Treasury, and I would be very careful to see any future controls placed on it. So I'd try and get as much information up front in respect to there. So just to add to the further woe, Naomi, on business rates, another one to add to the all list.
Yeah, business rates, the CARF. Fortunately, I've got Kevin J, who's dealing with all of that. But it's done perfect timing, not annual billing, multitude of grants, changing guidance, very difficult.
It's true what you've also just said there, Kevin, about business rates. I mean, it doesn't seem like it was 5 minutes ago that business rates were largely, for some local authorities, just a part-time person coming in to just keep on top of things. For others, maybe 2 or 3 people if they were a larger authority. But business rates was always small. I imagine business rates now are quite an expanding team, aren't they?
I would say business rates is getting quite complex now for a variety of different reasons. And the profile of it, with business grants, with help to local businesses, with the reliefs, I haven't even mentioned expanded retail discount yet, or nursery discount, and the reliefs and everything else have made it even more so. And I would suggest that local government has not pitched its pace to reward staff who are doing this work. My staff has certainly not seen any extra payment for the work they've done in our authority, and I'm talking about test and trace as well as the business rates side. It is a very technical area now, and it's not being recognised within local authorities.
And Naomi, from what you were saying as well earlier on, I mean, if they are small teams, then actually they could be devastated, as you say, by colds, much less coronavirus.
Yeah, we are at risk with everyone else of having people off sick. And there's an awful lot of work that must be done by certain deadlines, which if you then have even a small number of staff off sick, is going to really impact. You know, the bombshell about having to not only received but also determined the OHLG and the ARG applications by the 28th of February. That is going to be really difficult for us. But we're seeing significant numbers of self-isolation payment applications coming in.
Yeah,
having to try and grab additional staff to backfill in that area. Crikey, that's the staff that I was going to use for doing the ARG applications.
And I guess, I mean, Gareth, I know this you know, you don't run a local authority, but I guess probably for those of us
I'm very grateful.
But I guess for those of us who don't run local authorities, and we're hearing all of the pressures that are on the NHS, etc., this does seem to me to be one of those kind of forgotten areas where, you know, if there's, you know, you lose 25% of your staff, it's going to have an impact on, you know, on all of those people who receive benefits, all of those people who receive support, even for things like planning applications and collection of refuge and all of that stuff. It impacts quite widely, doesn't it? And exponentially.
I think it must do, and I guess that like many people, I suppose, I'm naively kind of viewing local authorities as a black box that should do things that they're meant to do when they're meant to do them, and without making too many errors. And I suppose my expectation would be that, you know, there would be a jiggling of resources where they're short, so that those priority areas are put first. And I guess I would always assume those priority areas to be, you know, the individuals who need support at that time. But I guess it's also true that everybody thinks they're a priority area who's in need of that kind of services from local authorities. And
Gareth, if I may come in when you finish, I'll let you finish first.
No. I was starting to wibble, I'm sure.
Yeah. What I would say to you is the revenues and benefits staff now have probably borne the brunt of the COVID work, probably saved the environmental health staff and in some cases economic development staff, but revenues and benefits have borne the brunt for 22 months now of the additional COVID staff, and there's been no let up. And by no let up, I'm meaning that because we didn't pay grants, you were still doing the reconciliations, you were still doing the post assurance work, you're still doing the test and trace payments, you're still doing all the relief work and everything else. There's just been no let up, and probably for very, very little extra resources than what we've actually had to start with. And we've got to do the day job as well.
I entirely appreciate that. And I guess one thing I've learned from being on these kind of calls is how much I didn't know about what went on in the background, if you like. What had to be done with it within kind of Revs and Ben's departments. Yeah, and I think that's true of all. I mean, I'm sure social service departments have been under pressure as well, and housing over the same kind of period. And it is, I think, clear to me that central government, in the whole pile of areas, more than just the benefits one that I know about, have really been dumping things on local authorities and not giving them the resources to do the necessary work.
Well, take CARF, for example. It was given to local authorities because VOA couldn't cope with it. And yet the VOA, and I don't think that's the whole story, because I think if there had been appeals, there'd have been a lot more money granted than the 1.5 billion that they've given to English authorities for the scheme, because I've got 3.4 million to actually do from it. But it's just the sheer amount of work that's thrown and thrust on local government, and as Naomi and I have said, the tight deadlines to do that, because you can't just plan for the next 3 or 4 months, because suddenly everything is up in the air and we're being changed. Will we get the additional resources? Well, getting business rate staff and business grant staff is not easy now, because we've all got the similar issues. And as Malcolm said, 5 or 6 years ago, business rates wasn't that big of an issue. Now it is, and so you suddenly got to start growing business rates, technical business rates people and grants people from nowhere, and that is entirely difficult to do.
And there's another aspect, isn't there, of business rates and business rates becoming a technical issue and growing like this within a local authority service provision, which is its crossover into things like regeneration, economic development, and all of those. It becomes a substantial building block to those areas. I mean, even setting aside the political dimensions of that, the practical dimensions of town centre management, economic development, regeneration, and business rates playing a critical part in all of that. Sort of makes for an interesting dynamic insofar as we've often thought of it as being purely transactional, haven't we? And now it's not. It's strategy as
the
well.
trouble is, you're dealing with a fairly new system, and I would say fairly new. Some of us are older in the teeth with it, and probably I've probably worked as hard as I've done in 40-year career in the last 18 22 months. But you're dealing with a fairly new system in an archaic organisation called local government that doesn't reflect the change of pace of a system, and doesn't reflect that in what it offers and pays to people.
Okay,
and I'm not talking
I
about.
think Malcolm's also right in terms of saying that it's the kind of the consequences of the interaction across departments that causes problems. And local authorities, again from the outside, always seem to me to be still silos of departments, and there's no real kind of corporate work, no cross-cutting policies that seem to recognise what each individial department issues
and I'd go further than that. I don't think benefits has been properly reflected in local government.
Okay, whilst generally I would agree with you boys up to a point, I'm going to ask Naomi here, because Naomi, you're a city council and you're a unitary as well, aren't you? No. You're not a unitary.
No, we're district.
We've got some unitaries on, I would think. Is it different at unitaries, do we think, than it is at counties in terms of that siloing? Or are unitaries now opening up those boundaries a bit more? Is there anybody on who might like to comment about that? Nick, is anybody look like they would like to chip in?
No, I can't see anyone.
Okay, everybody's a bit quiet, a bit shy.
They're probably shell shocked still.
Yeah, probably shell shocked. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this?
In respect of Gary Lasol's comments there in the comment box, I agree with him. You can't rely on previous awards or knowledge in respect of prepayment checks on the OHL grants, and that was made clear in the last seminar. Can I also, whilst we're waiting for questions, just cover expanded retail discounts, more supporting small business businesses, and also transitional relief, and certainly any with the system awareness will probably pick up their ears. Expanded retail discount has been extended. I think it was in the previous budget, but the guidance came out just before Christmas, just to give us a further present in the Christmas stocking. It is for 50% with a different cash cap, 110,000, as opposed to for the year for any help in England. I don't know quite where cash cap fits in with subsidy allowances, but that's just another thing to add to the complexity that we've got our business rate staff to cope with. If you'll notice, the previous scheme for 21-22 from the 1st of July was 66%, had a 2 million cash cap for any business closed at the 5th of January 2021, mandatory closed, and it also had 105,000 cash cap for any business that still traded, that was open, that met that criteria. It has also, by the way, sneakily left out 2 or 3 types of businesses. I think employment agencies, estate agents, and 1 or 2 other things is taken out of the. So do check the guidance on the types of businesses that can be allowed for that. The supporting small businesses, as you know, that was given at the 2017 budget. With the revaluation there, that was due to finish at the 31st of March 22, but it is continuing to the 31st of March 23 when we get the new revaluation. I wouldn't rule out a CARF scheme in 22-23, especially if COVID is still here, but we'll wait and see. But from the 23, there should be a revaluation. Be interesting to see what the multiplier is next year, because they've kept it below 50p. So it'll be interesting to see for the small multiplier exactly what that is in 23-24, because I think rateable values because of COVID will come down, but they'll have to self-finance it somehow. So you've got to put the bills. So how are you going to do that? It remains to be seen. The other thing is transitional relief. Well, I think they've made it very complex. Legislation late in the day, which has not helped software companies. I know my software company has got a meeting of its user group tomorrow morning to actually discuss the impact of that for annual billing. Just another thing to add to those list of things at annual billing that may give us an issue or two. Naomi, just to add, I'm sorry, I can't give you any good news, I'm afraid. I do apologise for that. I think it's going to be an interesting year. If you've got your retirement plan sorted, probably now's the time to think of them.
Okay. Right, Naomi, do you have anything to add to that other than suggesting that we all take boxes of Kleenex tissues to work with us so that we can sob quietly in the corner?
And of course, there's test and trace as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to reject you out of this meeting because you keep on finding more things there, Kevin. Right. Okay. So if there are no questions, I think given that we had a late start today, I'm not going to move to the next subject. We'll pick that up next week because I think that's going to be equally as depressing.
Malcolm, can I just
yes.
ask? John's very quiet. John Gibbs is very quiet today. Has he got any comments to make?
Yeah, John, do you want to jump on and make any comments?
Bearing in mind his system knowledge and awareness.
Yeah. The bit that gets us is the OHL grants. Payments should be made now. So they've got no time whatsoever to have a system solution. I think we'll be getting software out by Thursday, which will be a complete application form. In comes the information, assess it, push it forward for payment, make the payments, record all the details. So we're pulling out all the stops to try and get something out really quickly because of those short timescales that the two of you were suggesting. TR, like you say, was an interesting one. We should have a solution for that on our release that's going out end of January. So it's totally automated, because I think some of the authorities that we've taken on software from, who in 2015 had a similar thing and it was manually calculated, we found lots of errors in their manual calculations. And that's the problem. It's okay to do a manual calculation for the year, but then when you get splits and things like that and people don't reapply those types of reliefs, then it's very problematic. Like you say, I think the software houses are very similar to the local authorities in that it's been 22 months of really hard graft. And I know not many of you have many sympathies for the software houses, but yeah, we've burnt the candle at both ends, and it is getting quite difficult, I think, to try and keep pushing out all the software.
I do have sympathy for the software houses, John, by the way.
Thank you, Kevin. I do appreciate that.
There was an interesting session that I sat in from the NHS, who were talking about the speed in which they developed various solutions for them, and it was a really interesting session. And the one thing they said, and I expect, John, you and I would both understand this, is actually that pace of change is not something that can be maintained forever. The kind of quick, the way it's been done now isn't a long-term solution to software development.
No, quite. And I think the other aspect that in the early days of the grants made life difficult a bit later was the late request for the level of information required to be reported, which wasn't captured up front because it wasn't a requirement when the grant metrics were first announced and the guidance. and that's quite difficult, trying to play catch up on all the information that's then required in subsequent returns.
But do we think now that because of the way that government has sort of pushed the envelope, both with the local authorities and with software houses as well, and with the public for that matter, in terms of making very fast policy and strategy decisions, quite often ill-informed, because of the speeds that they've been made. I won't accuse anybody of just being an idiot when they made it, but because of the speed that they're making those decisions. But I've actually just thrust that on to the delivery systems, which is the local authorities having to deliver, the software houses having to produce the solutions.
Malcolm, can I just come in there? I know. But didn't they announce the MCC, what is now called CARF, on the 26th of March 2021?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's taken them until December to get a scheme out, and they publicised it. They've publicised it again, and local authorities are having to work a system that is probably going to be, and I know John might have a system in respect of his, but there's going to be some sort of manual input into that decision, because you've got to consider subsidy allowances and the impact on that business. So there's got to be some form of manual input into the decision what is made, and then you've got the actual checking, the post assurance, because at the end of the day, this is going to cost the Treasury megabucks, and there's going to be comeback on authorities that haven't followed the due process, the due rules.
But we've already seen partially this, haven't we, Kevin, insofar as the government has been announcing how it's going to audit the stuff that has gone before, and then all of a sudden we got the new stuff on the top of it. So even as they're announcing how they're going to collect and check on local authorities and the service provision earlier, they're now announcing new stuff in this kind of wave of
some authorities haven't reconciled from the first set of grants or provided the post assurance aspects of that. BIS were meant to be announcing findings from that, but that's been held up. That probably get held up even further now. But some authorities are struggling. But when you consider that the rules have changed consistently and constantly throughout, to such an extent where you get one set of guidance and you just wonder if they've completely rewritten the book.
Well, it can come as no surprise then that last week the National Audit Office refused to qualify the BIS accounts, basis that they had not kept them in good order and they've been subject to too much fraud.
I think it would be a kind of a headline story if they did approve the accounts of a lot of government departments. When was the DWP account last recognised or approved?
22 years ago. 22 years ago.
Yeah, that was when Malcolm worked for him, by the way. So it was the question.
22 years ago, I was still at school.
No, you weren't, Malcolm. We all know that.
I wasn't. Now you mention it, I think I've been working for about 20 years at that stage.
Yes.
Right, okay, on that basis, I make it 1:40, so we've...
Happy New Year, everyone.
Covered our time, yes.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Kevin, Naomi, and Gareth for the conversation, and everybody else, John there, for contributing. I would be remiss if I didn't remind people that, of course, if you are looking at doing forms and systems, then you should also consider ourselves at Team Nessel. Turns out we're actually quite good at this kind of stuff. And have been
why have you called it a perfect storm, Malcolm? I wouldn't say it's perfect, but any stretch of the imagination.
We're not moving on to that subject now, Kevin. It's
right, okay.
We'll do it next week. And you're familiar with the term a perfect storm. Okay. Thank you all very much. Hope you have a good week. Happy New Year to you all. And yes, and say goodbye to Nick. So
bye, Nick.
See you all except for Nick next week. Thank you very much.
Bye, Nick.
Bye.
Who's taking over your accounts, by the way?
Don't ask that question on this meeting. You can ask me later.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.